It really is. It's frustrating. The games ain't gonna slow down. The team's gonna keep getting better and better around us. So, we got to figure out how we're gonna turn this quarter in here. But it's been an extremely
Body language doesn't lie. That's not a player having a rough week. That's a 7-time All-Star days into a brand new chapter of her career, telling the entire world that something inside her team is broken. Music, and what you're about to watch is a 4-time champion who refused to let that slide. This is the Skylar Diggins situation and the legend, Music, who was not having any
more
of it.
Maturity and more leadership on and off the floor, from the players on the floor, and from the staff as well. Need more connectivity. If it was just versus one team, I'd understand that, but now it's been struggles versus.
So, let's set the table because the context here is everything. This past April, the Chicago Sky made the biggest free agency splash they'd made in music years. They signed Skylar Diggins to a 2-year deal worth about $1.86 million. At 35 years old, this is her 4th franchise. She came up with the Tulsa Shock that became the Dallas Wings, spent 3 years in Phoenix, 2 in Seattle, and now Chicago. 7-time All-Star, 6-time All-WNBA, Olympic gold medalist from Tokyo. This is a decorated championship-caliber guard, and the Sky didn't just add her. They tore the whole thing down and rebuilt around veterans. They traded Angel Reese to the Atlanta Dream. They brought in Natasha Cloud, Deja Carrington, and Raka Jackson. The message was loud. We're done rebuilding. We want to win now. And Skylar Diggins is the engine. So when she sits at that podium asking for more maturity, more leadership, more connectivity, she isn't describing some random roster. She's describing the team that was supposed to be her statement, and that's what makes those words sting.
I have one just on the half-court offense and execution of that.
That's a Tyler question. Ask Tyler.
Now the detail a lot of people glossed over is the one that turns this from a quote into a controversy. Skylar got a basketball question and she sent it straight to the coach. That's a Tyler question. Ask Tyler. Tyler Marsh. That's the Sky head coach. Remember that handoff because in a few minutes it becomes the exact moment a Hall of Famer pounces. But first, give Diggins her fair shake because the team she's frustrated with has, Music, been gutted. Raka Jackson, who'd been leading the Sky in scoring at 22 points a game, tore her left ACL and is out for the entire season. Music, Courtney Vanderloot is still working back from her own torn ACL. Janai Carrington had foot surgery in April with no timetable. Azura Stevens missed the start of the year with a knee problem. At one stretch, Chicago was down to 8 available bodies. So, yes, some of that frustration is the sound of a competitor watching a contender fall apart before June even ends. The question Cynthia Cooper is about to raise isn't whether the frustration is real. It's where you're allowed to say it out loud.
You've been paying attention to the WNBA, the Chicago Sky, especially over the last couple of weeks. There's some frustrations. You hear it from their leader in Skylar Diggins right there. Obviously, she wants more. She's demanding more, not just from her team, but also of herself. I do want to get your thoughts on her.
And that's exactly where this jumped the walls of one locker room and became a league-wide conversation. Because before Chicago faced the Indiana Fever this past Thursday, the broadcast desk got asked to weigh in on Diggins' comments. Sitting there were 2 of the most credentialed voices you can put on a panel. Cynthia Cooper and Swin Cash. Between them, you've got a Hall of Fame career and a stack of titles. These are not hot-take artists firing for clicks. This is basketball royalty being handed a simple question on a national broadcast. Was Skylar right to air all of that into a microphone? And the fascinating part is that they did not land in the same place. One of them came down hard on the side of old-school discipline. The other tried to hand Diggins a lifeline. So pay attention to the split, Music, because the gap between these 2 answers is the whole story. It's not really about Chicago anymore. Music, it's about what we expect from professionals when the cameras are rolling.
Any player or coach going into a press conference and sounding off. You don't play with the media. You play with those teammates in that locker room. So for me, those are face-to-face conversations you have in that locker room about what we need to do to get better. We come together, we become
That's the old school code in a single breath. Music, you don't play with the media, you play with the teammates in that locker room. For Cooper, the press table is the last place a frustration like that belongs. Those are face-to-face conversations behind a closed door about what the group actually needs to do to get better. And then she closed it out. We come together. We become champions. Why does that land coming from her and not from some random voice on a panel? Because before there was a Caitlin Clark. Before there was an Aya Wilson, there was Cynthia Cooper. She is the original superstar of this league. So when she says airing it out publicly isn't how winners operate, she isn't speaking in theory. She is the one person at that desk who actually built a dynasty from the ground up. And notice what she did not say. She didn't say Diggins is wrong to want more. She didn't call the frustration fake. She drew her line around the where and the how, not the what. That's a surgical distinction, and it's the exact part today's audience tends to skip right past because the disagreement at that table was about to get a whole lot sharper.
And so I understand exactly what Coop is saying. I also want to get to the other side of that. When you signed to go to Chicago, all players talk about some of the situations and troubles that they have had kind of internally, right, with players. Yep. And so she's coming there because she wanted to change the culture. How that's going to manifest itself is still to be determined, but you have to also understand how early you are in the season. And so to watch how they played after those comments, I think is where you have to start looking. Was that to light a fire
right there is
underneath
the
them?
counter-argument delivered by someone every bit as decorated. Swin Cash didn't dismiss Cooper. She said she understood exactly what Coop was saying. Then she turned the coin over. Her point was this. You have to factor in who Skylar Diggins is. This is a fierce, relentless competitor who has never once backed down in her career. And she didn't sign in Chicago to coast. She came to change a culture. A team that finished dead last in 2025 doesn't get fixed by being polite. So maybe what sounded like sounding off was a leader lighting a fire under a roster that needed one. Cash also planted the flag that matters most. It's still to be determined. We are barely into the season. The real tell, she argued, isn't the press conference, it's how the team played afterward. Did those words land as poison, music, or did they land as a spark? That's a legitimate frame, and it's the strongest possible defense of what Diggins did. Music. So now you've got the two poles. Cooper says keep it in the room. Cash says judge the result, not the volume. Two champions, two philosophies, one microphone. And then Cooper got asked about that little Ask Tyler, music, a moment. The handoff I told you to remember. This is where it stopped being a debate and turned music
I wish
personal.
I would have gone into a conference, a media conference, and be like, no, ask Van Chancellor. That's a Van Chancellor question. Yeah, no, that's not what we did. That's why we won 4 championships.
The one thing we do.
Ooh, did you hear the ooh?
Did you catch that reaction? That little ooh from the desk? That's the sound of a room realizing a legend just drew a line in the sand. Cynthia Cooper could barely sit still. You could see it building on her face before she even opened her mouth. So, let's decode exactly what set her off. Remember Skylar's handoff? A basketball question sent, music, straight to the coach? That's a Tyler question. Cooper's response in essence, I would never have walked into a press conference and bounced a basketball question to my coach. And the coach she's talking about is Van Chancellor, the man who ran the Houston Comets. She said plainly, that's not what we did. And then she dropped the hammer. That's why we won championships. Now, sit with the weight behind that sentence. Cynthia Cooper isn't quoting a textbook. She won the first 4 titles in WNBA history with Houston from 1997 through the year 2000. She was Finals MVP in every single one of them. She was the league MVP twice. Nobody on that broadcast and almost nobody alive has earned the right to say that's why we won championships the way she just did, and that's why the line cut so deep. It wasn't an insult. It was a standard. She wasn't mocking Skylar Diggins. She was holding up a measuring stick from an era when superstars handled their grievances behind the door and let the scoreboard do the talking. The U wasn't shock at rudeness. It was the room recognizing that a generational gap had just been exposed in real time, because that's really what this whole thing is about. There's a divide running through women's basketball right now, and it comes down to how much honesty the audience can actually stomach. Candace Parker, another champion-turned-analyst, has been beating this drum for a while. Her message, music, more or less, is stop tiptoeing around women's sports. We say we want to be taken seriously, but we flinch at the critique that comes with being taken seriously. You can't have one without the other. And every time a Parker or a Cooper says something blunt, a chunk of the audience treats accountability like an attack. The tell that proves the double standard exists is simple. When the player on the receiving end is Caitlin Clark, the criticism arrives fast and it arrives loud. We've all watched it happen over and over again. But when Skylar Diggins airs out her own teammates from a podium, the framing softens to, oh, she's just fired up. She's a competitor. Same music league, 2 completely different rulebooks depending on who's talking. Cooper, to music, her credit, applied one rulebook to everybody. Now, in fairness to Diggins, because this has to cut both ways, the frustration is grounded in something real. Music, her roster has been gutted by injuries. A season-ending ACL for Rakwa Jackson. Foot surgery for DJ Carrington. Knee trouble for Vanderloot, and, music, Stevens. A leader who shows she cares deeply about winning is not a villain. And Cooper never argued otherwise. Music, the disagreement was never emotion versus no emotion. It was emotion in the locker room versus emotion in the press conference. There's also an inconvenient footnote for everybody. The night Cooper and Cash debated all of this, Chicago went out and lost. The Indiana Fever beat the Sky 114-106 in overtime. Caitlin Clark put up 32 points and, music, 10 assists. Aaliyah Boston went for 34 and 12. Skylar Diggins scored 21 and competed her tail off, but her team still came up short in a game they had every chance to steal. So, Swin Cash's own test, judge it by how they played afterward, at least on that Thursday, didn't exactly break in Skylar's favor. What happens next is the real story to watch. Tyler Marsh has to thread a needle most coaches never face. Folding Stevens, then Vanderloot, then, music, Carrington back into the lineup midseason without blowing up the chemistry the healthy players fought to build. That's a fragile locker room. And Skylar Diggins is 35 on a 2-year deal with a championship window that is open right now and won't stay open forever. Music. The clock is loud, the pressure is real, and the next press conference is always one bad night away. But step back, and this is the part one keep coming back to. The league is better when it has voices like Cynthia Cooper at that desk. People who aren't bought and paid for, will tell you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable, instead of nodding along to keep everyone happy. That old school standard isn't an attack on the modern game. It's a gift to music, It's somebody who built a dynasty, handing the blueprint to anyone willing to listen. So, I'll leave you with the question, and I want a real answer in the comments. Was Cooper right? Frustration like that belongs behind a closed door, and you let the scoreboard do your talking. Or was Skylar Diggins doing exactly what a leader is supposed to do, lighting a public fire under a team that finished dead last and needed to be shaken? You cannot sit in the middle on this one. Pick a side and tell me why. If this breakdown gave you something to chew on, music, do me a favor, tap that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you on the next.